For decades, the U.S. Army kept it classified. Photos of American soldiers standing over dead Germans, reports of executions, evidence of war crimes. Then, in 1991, the files were opened, and the world learned what really happened on April 29, 1945, the day American soldiers found Dachau. That morning, the 45th Infantry Division was pushing toward Munich. They thought they were attacking a supply depot. They found a train instead, 39 cattle cars. The smell hit them before they saw inside. When they opened the doors, they found 2,300 bodies, stacked like garbage. Starved. Beaten, left to die. The soldiers were veterans. They had seen combat. They thought nothing could shock them. They were wrong. What they saw in those train cars broke something inside them. The sadness turned to rage. Cold, murderous, uncontrollable. They walked into the camp. They found SS guards, well-fed, clean, acting like nothing was wrong. And then the Americans did something that would haunt them forever. Welcome to History of World War II. This is the story the Army tried to hide. The day soldiers lined up 50 SS guards against a wall. The day they opened fire. The day they shot men off watchtowers and watched prisoners beat guards to death. Investigators called it a massacre. They recommended court-martials. They collected evidence. But General Patton made it all disappear. Hit subscribe, because you're about to learn why some war crimes are never punished, why some murders are called justice, and why the men who did it never apologized. The men of the 45th Infantry Division were not murderers. They were farm boys, factory workers, students. They were the liberators. Before April 29th, they had a reputation for being professional. They took prisoners. They treated the wounded. But Dachau changed them in an instant. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks was the commander on the ground. He tried to keep control. He shouted orders. Keep moving. Don't look at the train. But you could not look. There were 2,300 bodies on that train. The soldiers walked past them. They saw the eyes of the dead staring at them. They saw the skeletons. They saw the bite marks. This was the Buchenwald death train. It had left Buchenwald on April 7th, 22 days earlier. Inside were prisoners being evacuated. The SS locked the doors. No food. No water. No stops. For 22 days, people died. They died of thirst. They died of starvation. They died of exposure. When someone died, their body stayed in the car. The living sat with the corpses for days, for weeks. By the time the train reached Dachau, 2,300 people were dead. Private John Lee was there. He said later, "We were mad. We were so mad we wanted to kill every German in the world." The soldiers kept moving toward the camp gates. Their hands were shaking, their fingers on the triggers. They reached the main gate of the camp. The SS guards were still there. The Commandant Martin Weiss had fled, but he left behind a young lieutenant named Heinrich Wicker and about 500 SS men. Wicker knew the war was over. He wanted to surrender. He put on his best uniform. He polished his boots. He walked out with a white flag. He expected to be treated like an officer. He expected a salute. He expected respect. He walked up to the Americans. He said, "I surrender this camp to the United States Army." An American officer looked at the clean, well-fed Nazi. Then he looked at the pile of starving corpses behind him. He spit in the German's face. The surrender did not go as planned. If you had seen that train, could you have stayed professional? Let me know in the comments. The Americans entered the camp. Chaos broke loose. The prisoners saw the Americans. 30,000 skeletons rushed the fences. They were screaming with joy. They were crying. Americans, Americans. But while the prisoners cheered, the soldiers were hunting. They walked through the camp. They saw the barracks, 10 men to a bunk designed for 2. They saw the crematorium, still warm, still full of ash, human ash. They saw rooms full of belongings, shoes, thousands of pairs, eyeglasses, stacked high, all from people who would never need them again. And standing throughout the camp were SS guards, well-fed, clean uniforms, polished boots. The American soldiers looked at them, really looked at them. These guards had eaten while prisoners starved. They had slept warm while prisoners froze. They had done this, all of this. Something inside the Americans broke. A group of SS guards tried to surrender near a coal yard. They raised their hands. They shouted, "Hitler caput. Hitler is finished." They thought this magic phrase would save them. It didn't. An American lieutenant was watching them. We believe it was Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead, a Native American officer from Oklahoma. He was shaking. He had just seen the crematorium. He had seen the oven still full of human ash. He looked at the SS guards standing there, healthy, arrogant. He looked at his men. He didn't give a verbal order. He just gestured with his Thompson submachine gun. Line them up. The Germans were confused. They lined up against a brick wall. About 50 of them. They started to panic. Neen. Geneva Convention. One shouted. An American machine gunner nicknamed Bird-Eye set up his .30 caliber machine gun on a tripod. A sound of heavy metal clicking. He looked at the lieutenant. The lieutenant nodded. Massive sustained machine gun fire. Screaming. It lasted for about 10 seconds. When the smoke cleared, the SS guards were on the ground. Most were dead. Some were twitching. The snow was black with coal dust and red with blood. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks heard the shooting. He came running. He saw his men firing into the pile of bodies. He pulled out his pistol and fired into the air. A sound of a pistol shot. Stop it. He screamed. Stop it. What the hell are you doing? The gunner looked at him. His eyes were blank. He wasn't sorry. He was crying. Colonel, he said, they deserved it. Sparks knew he should arrest the man. Right there. Court-martial him on the spot. But he had seen the train too. He had seen what these guards had done. He holstered his pistol. He walked away. That wasn't the only incident. It was happening everywhere. At Tower B, SS guards tried to surrender. They climbed down the ladder with their hands up. The American soldiers didn't wait. They shot them off the ladder. Fire. The bodies fell into the moat. The Americans then walked up to the edge of the moat. They emptied their magazines into the water. Just to be sure. 1G later wrote home, it wasn't war. It was an execution, and I didn't feel a thing. After what I saw in those boxcars, they weren't human to me anymore. But the Americans weren't the only ones killing. The prisoners wanted their turn. Somehow, the prisoners got out of the barracks. They were weak. They could barely walk, but they had adrenaline. They found an SS guard hiding in a watchtower. They dragged him down. They didn't have guns. They had shovels. They had sticks. They had their bare hands. The American soldiers stood by and watched. They smoked cigarettes. An officer asked, "Should we stop them?" A sergeant replied, "No, let them finish." The prisoners beat the guard to death. They tore him apart. It was primal. It was savage. It was justice. In another part of the camp, the prisoners found a German capo, a prisoner who worked for the Nazis and beat other prisoners. They drowned him in a latrine. For 1 hour, Dachau was a lawless zone. The victims became the judges, the juries, the executioners, and the U.S. Army simply looked the other way. Eventually, order was restored. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks stopped the killing. He locked up the surviving Germans to save them from his own men. But the secret couldn't be kept forever. Photos had been taken, photos of American soldiers standing over piles of executed Germans, photos of the Coal Yard Massacre. Should these soldiers have been prosecuted for what they did? Let me know in the comments. A few days later, an investigative team arrived, led by Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whitaker. They interviewed the soldiers. They collected the photos. They wrote a report. Investigation of alleged mistreatment of German guards at Dachau. The report was damning. It concluded that American troops had violated international law. It recommended courts-martial. It recommended that the heroes of Dachau be treated as criminals. The report was sent up the chain of command. It landed on the desk of General George S. Patton. Patton read the report. He looked at the photos of the dead SS guards. He looked at the photos of the death train. Patton was a strict disciplinarian. He usually punished soldiers for having unpolished boots. But this was different. Patton knew what his men had seen. He knew that the SS were monsters. He called the SS the slime of the earth. He summoned the investigating officer. He held up the report. "What is this garbage?" The officer said, "Sir, it is evidence of war crimes." Patton threw the report on his desk. "War crimes? You walk into a place like that. You see the 1,000 dead bodies on a train. You expect my boys to follow the rule book? Hell no." Patton reportedly said, "These men were overwrought. They had nervous trigger fingers. It happens in war." Then he did something legendary. He didn't sign the court-martial papers. He took the report, and according to some sources, he ordered it to be buried in the deepest top-secret file in the archive, never to be opened. He told his staff, there will be no trial. The SS got what they deserved. Dismissed. Eisenhower, the supreme commander, agreed. He saw the photos of the death train. He realized that putting American heroes on trial for killing Nazi monsters would destroy morale. So the order came down, quashed the investigation, the charges were dropped. Lieutenant Jack Bushy Head, who we believe ordered the shooting, went home to Oklahoma. He never spoke about it. He died in 1977, a silent hero with a dark secret. The other soldiers went home. They became teachers, farmers, businessmen. They carried the memory of the death train for the rest of their lives. They tried to forget the shooting, but they never regretted it. One veteran said years later, "I know killing prisoners is wrong, but that day, at that place, it felt like the only right thing to do." The Dachau reprisals remain a controversial topic today. Neo-Nazis use it to say, look, the Americans were bad too, but historians see it differently. It wasn't a planned genocide. It was a human reaction. It was the snap of the human mind when confronted with pure evil. When you see a child starve to death, when you see a room full of bodies, can you remain a professional soldier, or do you become an avenger? The soldiers of the 45th Division made their choice. They chose vengeance, and General Patton chose to protect them. Today at Dachau, there is a memorial. It honors the 30,000 victims of the camp, but there is no memorial for the 50 SS guards who died against the wall. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves, forgotten. History has judged them. They were the architects of hell, and on April 29, 1945, they met the devil. The question the Dachau reprisals raise has never been answered. Where's the line between justice and vengeance? When does a soldier's duty end and his humanity take over? The men of the 45th Infantry Division drew that line in the snow at Dachau, and General Patton decided not to erase it. If you believe this history should never be forgotten, hit that like button now. This is the hardest question in war. If you had seen the death train, would you have pulled the trigger? Be honest. Don't give the answer you think you should give. Give the answer you know is true, because the soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division faced that choice. Not as theory, as reality. They chose vengeance. They chose it over protocol, over law, over everything they've been taught, and a 4-star general chose to protect them. History has judged the SS guards. They were architects of hell, perpetrators of genocide, and on April 29, 1945, they got what they deserved. The American soldiers went home. They tried to forget, but you don't forget something like that. You carry it forever. So what do you think? Were the Dachau reprisals justified? Or were they war crimes that should have been prosecuted? Be honest. Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see the story of how Patton forced German civilians to walk through Buchenwald Wall, that video is coming next. The Parade of Shame. The moment an entire city's denial was shattered. Click subscribe so you don't miss it. Because sometimes the only way to stop evil is to force people to look at it. To really look at it. Thanks for watching.